We're in John 21. We're going to finish up the Gospel of John today. And don't forget, Wednesday night is singing night. Next Sunday, I'll be out of town, but Adam will be teaching, and he's doing something on Abraham and Lot, I think. And so he'll be teaching Sunday and Wednesday. I didn't want to give him my introductory class for 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. So he's going to be doing something on Abraham and Lot, and then I'll be back the next Sunday, the second Sunday in October, and we'll get started with 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. And there is a handout in the back that has the quarter. And like I've told you before, you probably already picked up on this, I follow the schedule. So if you want to grab one of those, you're welcome to it. But today we're going to finish up John's Gospel, John chapter 21. This is where we'll be. And before we dig into the text, let's go ahead and go to our Father in prayer. Father, we thank you for the blessings you give to us. We're thankful for our time of study this morning. We are so thankful for the Gospel of John. This book helps us, Father. It helps bring us to believe that Jesus is your Son, the Christ, and that He truly came back from the dead, and we can give our lives to Him, and we can live for Him in this earth. Help us, Father, to make good applications of the text, to live for Him now. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. All right, John 21. Now, maybe there's a couple of kind of technical notes that perhaps should be made. There have been many people challenge John 21 as not authentic. And the reason is fairly natural behind why they would do that, because what's it doing here? John 20 has already answered the fact that Jesus came back from the dead. In fact, John 20 verses 30 and 31 would just be a great place to end the book, wouldn't it? You know, wow, Jesus did a lot of other things. They're not written in this book, but this is written so that you may believe. Well, why not just end there? And that's what a lot of, some scholars have tried to argue through the years. Oh, see, John 21 is a later addition to the Gospel. Only briefly I will mention this. We have no manuscript evidence that suggests this chapter was ever not with this Gospel. Okay? So people can theorize, well, you know, it just doesn't seem right. It kind of, you know, theorize all you want. There is no manuscript evidence that doesn't have this Gospel, including this chapter. Okay? That's pretty tough to argue with. So I believe it's authentic. I believe the evidence strongly suggests it's authentic. And there are some things that are happening in this chapter that I do believe are relevant for what's happening in the overall Gospel and what's going to happen in the book of Acts, who is kind of, you know, it's kind of the unabridged sequel to all 4 Gospel accounts, okay? Especially Luke's. You know, Luke's got one, and then the sequel is Acts. Y'all know what sequels are? It's Sunday. You should be nodding. Everybody good? Okay. All right, John 21, please. Look at verse 1. After these things, Jesus showed Himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and in this way He showed Himself: Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of His disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we are going with you also. They went out and immediately got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. But when the morning had now come, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Then Jesus said to them, Boys, have you any food? They answered Him, No. He said to them, Cast the nets on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast, and now they were not able to draw it in because of the multitude of fish. Therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, It is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was wearing only an undergarment, and plunged into the sea. The other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, about 200 cubits, dragging the net with fish. Then, as soon as they had come to the land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, Bring some of the fish which you have just caught. Simon Peter went up and dragged the net to land, full of large fish, 153, and although there were so many, the net was not broken. Jesus said to them, Come and eat breakfast. And none of the disciples dared ask Him, Who are you?, knowing that it was the Lord. Then, Jesus, verse 13, Jesus then came and took the bread and gave it to them, and likewise the fish. This is now the 3rd time Jesus showed Himself to His disciples after He was raised from the dead. All right. So you'll notice after these things is a little ambiguous. It's the beginning of this text, verse 1. But we're just talking about sometime after the resurrection. Probably fairly quickly after what he just did in chapter 20, where he appeared to the disciples and then appeared to the disciples and Thomas. So we're probably dealing with just pretty quickly after all of that has happened. John kind of succinctly says here, he appeared to them again. Now, this is at the Sea of Tiberias, which remember John chapter 6, Sea of Tiberias was a later name for the Sea of Galilee. So, down here, South Judea, not showing up on the board. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Just really quickly, y'all know the drill at this point. Apple TV is going to make some advertisements when I reconnect this. We don't endorse any of Apple TV stuff, okay? And I have no idea what's going to show up. You just never know that's Apple TV products. So I'm going to do this quickly, try to get it reconnected. Oh, it didn't do that time. Oh, wonderful. Look at that. I don't trust technology. This is why we have a Helvey. Okay. All right, so South Judea, still not showing up, but you see it on the south of the screen there. And then Galilee towards the northern area. So there evidently is enough time they traveled back to the north, which is where most of them are from. And so they're up there around the Sea of Tiberias, Sea of Galilee. The fact that he calls it the Sea of Tiberias also lends weight to this maybe being written later in the first century, because it was the Sea of Galilee early in the first century, Sea of Tiberias later in the first century. And so little hints like that. Notice verse 2. Here is the list of disciples. Now, something kind of subliminal. Our writer is one of these men. You say, Devan, how do you get John the Apostle, John the son of Zebedee, and how do people believe that he's the one who wrote this? This is the only place the sons of Zebedee are mentioned. The only place. And if you don't name one of the kind of highlight characters, what are you doing? You notice that none of the sons of Zebedee have been mentioned in this entire gospel, and now at the very end, we get a little bitty statement, the sons of Zebedee are here. What in the world? John, the apostle, is one of Jesus' inner circle men. How could you go an entire gospel and not mention him? Unless you are him. You see how that makes sense? Now, all these individuals, these apostles here, are together. You notice Thomas, Didymus. Okay, Thomas is the Aramaic, Didymus the Greek. Both mean twin. And so Nathanael, he's not really been mentioned since John chapter 1. And now the two sons of Zebedee. So Simon Peter says, verse 3, I'm going fishing. Now, individuals have read this all along, especially because what happens later in the chapter, that Peter was just kind of forsaking his commission. He's just going to leave it alone, and he's going back to his old life. Come on. I mean, cut the guy a little bit of slack. He's a fisherman. What do fishermen do? They fish. They fish. Perhaps it's not unreasonable to assume that because of everything that has happened the last few days, he wants to go fish to clear his head. I got to think about this. I mean, just don't read into everything. Who in the world knows what's going on? Peter just simply says, I'm going fishing. I'm not going to subscribe to him some kind of weak faith or something like that. He's just going fishing. And the others decide to go fishing with him. They get out in the boat, and I want you to notice verse 3. They're fishing at night. They catch nothing. Anybody remember where this happens in another place? That was a little less than what I was expecting. Remember Luke chapter 5, where Jesus calls the fishermen. They're fishing. They catch nothing. Jesus is cast on the other side. But we've been doing this all night. We've not caught anything. And he says, just cast on the other side. What happens? Boom, lots of fish. Lots of fish. Okay? Now, we're getting some hints here. Now, individuals sometimes look at this and say, this is John's record of the earlier account. But I don't think that's the case because there's too many things that are different in this text. Okay? Nothing in Luke 5 says Peter dove out of the boat and swam to the shore. Nothing about Luke 5 counts the fish and Peter draws. None of that happens. This is John's record. There is a second catch of fish. Okay? So they catch nothing at night. Verse 4, now morning had come, and who's standing there? Jesus. Y'all seeing the symbolism? Remember, John's really heavy on symbolism. Night and light. Okay, I mean, just big contrast. What does Judas do when he goes to betray Jesus? He goes out into the night. Why? Because it's a symbol. Not just that he literally went out into the darkness, that's true, but he also went out into darkness, figuratively speaking. And Jesus is who? The light of the world. Now, what are y'all seeing in this text? They're out fishing all night, they catch nothing. And who shows up in morning light? Jesus, the light of the world. Now what's going to happen? Oh, things are going to change. So, Jesus stood on the shore, verse 4. The disciples did not know it was Jesus, and maybe this is a road to Emmaus sort of thing where he's kind of, I don't know. Probably though, they've been fishing all night. They're looking across the early morning, across the water to, maybe he's far enough they can't see him. I don't know. I'm not going to arm wrestle you for that one. Look at verse 5. Boys, have you any food? They answered no. So Jesus says, cast the net on the right side of the boat, you will find some. You notice they didn't hesitate on this one? Luke's, they hesitate. Well, we've been out here fishing all night. They didn't hesitate on this one. Maybe there's a little bit of like, this is odd. What's going on here? So they cast the other side. And what happens? Verse 6, they catch so many they're not able to draw it in. And I love this. Look at verse 7. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter. Who's the disciple whom Jesus loved? John. John says to Peter, Peter, it is the Lord. So look at what these two dudes are pretty entertaining to read about. John is always quick to the thought. Peter's always quick to the action. Do y'all see that? John's the one who's really perceptive. Wait a minute now. And he'll say something. But Peter's the one who goes, do what? And then just dives into the water. You see? That's Peter. So he says, it is the Lord. He's quick to the draw. Peter says, oh, okay. He straps on his outer garment and he dives into the sea. Don't read that into our modern thinking. He's not stripped down to the bare nothings. Remember, in Judaism, in the Jewish culture, they had basically an undergarment, which would have been like basically a really light work shirt. I mean, he's wearing work clothes, okay? And so his outer robe he had taken off, and he's just wearing kind of just a real thin shirt and some breeches so he can do his work. His hands aren't restricted, and he probably ties the garment around his waist, so his arms are still free to swim, and he dives into the sea, okay? And so he swims across. You notice what happens, though? We're not told anything else about Peter here in this little context. The story does not follow Peter, does it? Peter dives into the sea. Evidently, he gets to Jesus. And evidently, he would have spoken to Jesus. He didn't stand there just going, blah, 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 blah. There's got to be some kind of dialogue between him and Jesus, but John doesn't record that for us. John instead follows the boats and follows the fish. Why does John do that? He's on the boat. You ever thought about that before? The reason he doesn't follow Peter to the shoreline and Peter's dialogue with Jesus is because he's not with them. That does not discount inspiration, okay? But he's John in the boat. He's telling about the fish. And so the other disciples come in the little boat not far from the land, about 200 cubits, dragging the net with fish. More than likely, there's one large boat and then several smaller fishing boats, okay? And the large boat doesn't come into the land, okay? That would have been docked at an actual dock. But the little boats can come up to the land. And so what happens is they gather up the little boats and they're tugging along the fish behind them in the net. Now all of this, pretty incredible. So notice verse 9, they come to the land, they see a fire, and they see fish laid on it. And verse 10, Jesus says, bring some of the fish you just caught. Now, speculation, somebody says, okay, why didn't Jesus just multiply the fish again? He's already done that. I have no idea. Just not a clue, okay? Maybe it's reinforcing what he just did for them. Instead of multiplying fish he's already got, he wants them to bring in the fish they just got by his work. Now, maybe there are some subliminal things here about evangelism, because what does Jesus tell them in Luke chapter 5? I'm going to make you what? Fishers of men. So maybe there's some of that going on. He says, bring the fish up. In verse 11, Simon Peter goes out and drags the net to the land full of large fish, 153, and although there were so many, the net was not broken. There's a lot going on in verse 11, okay? What does verse 11 really tell us? Let's think about this. What does it tell us about Peter? He's pretty strong. He's pretty strong. There were so many fish in this net, they couldn't drag it into the boat. But Peter wades out into the water, grabs up the net, and drags all of it on shore. He's not no scrawny fella. But what do we know? He's a first century fisherman who probably hits his Bowflex. Y'all good? So Peter drags the net on land, okay? Now it's full of large fish. What do we make of 153? Eyewitness. Y'all seeing this? Eyewitness account. He doesn't just say they caught some fish. No. He's very specific. They caught 153 fish. Now, that's amplified even more. Although there were so many, the net was not broken. What does that mean? Well, eyewitness. John was there. He saw this. We already got a little of that in John 19. We're going to get a little of that in this chapter as well. This is really an eyewitness account. Now, maybe there's something else here about almost symbolic. The net should have broken. You see, that's almost the implied by his statement. There were so many. It was large fish, lots of fish. The net wasn't broken. Implied is the net should have broke. But what, I mean, is there almost some symbolism there with Jesus? I think you could go that route a little bit. Maybe it's not just that the fish are miraculously caught. It's that the net didn't break miraculously. You know, I don't know. Maybe there's a little of that happening in the passage too. So Jesus says, come and eat breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you, knowing it was the Lord. You think they'd kind of learned their lesson at this point in John's Gospel? They jumped out and asked him questions all the time, and then he goes, no, that's not it. It's this, you know. And so this time they don't ask him, who are you? They know. And so Jesus came, took the bread, gave it to them, likewise the fish. You know, you can't help but wonder, remember what happens in John 6 when Jesus multiplied the fish? You remember how that happened then? Jesus blessed it, and then Jesus started handing it to the disciples for the disciples to disperse. It'd be hard not to see that too. The last time that Jesus handed out a bunch of fish, it was feeding thousands of people. You know, you see him handing a fish to this disciple and a fish to this disciple. Some of that's got to be, this is Jesus. This is Jesus. In verse 14, this is the third time Jesus showed himself to his disciples after he's raised from the dead. John's pretty explicit. Jesus came back from the dead. This is not the third time total, okay? This is the third time John records it. So there are other occasions. I mean, we already know that. There are other occasions where Jesus appeared to disciples. But John's telling us his version of the story that complements the synoptic accounts, and this is the third time John records it happens, okay? Questions on that first 14 or so verses? All right, verse 15. So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Most assuredly I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. This he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. Now, there are some questions here. Did this happen in front of the other disciples? It's just not real clear. Did him and Peter stepped away from the other? We just don't know. We're not told. But all of this is significant in that he's restoring Peter. He's restoring Peter. Okay? So Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? Kind of ambiguous, but probably, do you love me more than these disciples do? Now remember what Peter told Jesus. Even if all should forsake you, I won't. Remember all that? It's a big part of this. Peter said all those things and then denied the Lord. And what's Jesus doing? He's getting Peter restored. So, do you love me more than these? So, do you love me more than these other disciples? He said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. There might be other ways to take that expression. I mean, some people have taken it to the fishing. Do you love me more than these fish? Like the past life kind of stuff. Do you love me more than your past life before you were a disciple? I'm just not real sure. Or do you love me more than you love them, the disciples? Take it however you want to take it. But generally, the most natural way to read the text is, do you love me more than these disciples do? Okay? And so this happens several times. You notice what happens. He asks the question. And then when Peter responds, he then says, feed my sheep or feed my lamb. Take care of my stuff. So he says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus does know that, right? I mean, Jesus knows that. Of course Jesus knows that. He knows to what extent Peter loves him. But he wants to reinforce this to Peter. So, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said, yes, Lord, verse 16. So tend my sheep. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He was grieved because he said it the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Why does Jesus say this 3 times to him? Because Peter denied him 3 times. For every denial, Jesus makes a restoration. So, do you love me? Yes. Then you need to go back to your work. Do you love me? Yes. Then you need to go back to work. All right. Do you love me? Yes. Then you need to go back to work. And so that's what Jesus does for Peter. And so verse 18, he says, most assuredly I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself, walked where you wish, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. All right. Some of that reflects the really brash nature of Peter. Like I said earlier, what does Peter do? Peter's the first one going to start swinging. He's the first one going to make a comment. He's the first one going to dive into the sea. He's the first one going to be inside the tomb. I mean, he's going to be first. And that's also going to suit him well. Because who's the first one to preach after the resurrection? Peter. I love taking a little time. We're not going to do it right now. Following the story of these disciples. Who were the brothers who said, Lord, why don't we call down thunder from heaven and to consume the Samaritan village? James and John. And who's the disciple that speaks more about love and compassion than any other? John. Do you see the growth? John says, hey, let's just roast them all, Lord. and then that's the same John who says, love one another as he loved us. Ooh. What about Peter? Peter's the one who denies him 3 times. And then Peter's the one who stands up at Pentecost and preaches. And then what does Peter say? 1 Peter 3:15, sanctify the Lord in your hearts and always be ready to give a defense to anyone who might ask. Wait a minute. That's the disciple who denied Jesus. Well, maybe that's why he's saying always be ready to make a defense. You see? That's a big part of the growth of each of these disciples, each of these apostles. And so, that's part of what Jesus is telling him here. You were younger, you did what you wanted to do. But there's going to come a point, Peter, where that will not be the case anymore. When you're old, you have your hands stretched out, and you will be girded, and you'll be carried where you do not wish. Now, John tells us this, verse 19, this was about his death. Now, if John's writing in, let's say, the 80s, then Peter's been dead for about 15 or 17 years. Historically, Peter was crucified upside down. When it came time to be crucified by Nero in Rome, his comment was, I am not worthy to hang the way my Lord hung. And so they crucified him upside down at his request. That's all historical information. The text does not say that, so you take it for what it's worth. But that certainly, his martyrdom is certainly what's being talked about here. Whether he was crucified upside down like history says or not, he still died for the faith. And that's part of Jesus' point here. And that's the other thing that kind of reinforces that whole, he was crucified, because the language John uses here was customary for crucifixion. He was, had his hands stretched out, yeah, like Jesus, hands stretched out to the cross, and girded and carried where he did not wish to go. Those are expressions that would have suggested crucifixion too. All right, so at the end of this, verse 19, he is recommissioned. Follow me. Remember, end of Luke 5, that's what he tells the disciples. When he calls them from fishing, he says, you're going to be fishers of men. What does he tell them? Follow me. And you see it happening again here. He's recommissioned them on this side of the resurrection. Questions on that? So, verse 20. Then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following, who also had leaned on his chest at the supper, and had said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, Lord, what will this man do? Jesus said to him, If I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Then this saying went out among the brethren, that this disciple would not die. Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? This is the disciple who testifies of these things, who wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true, and there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Amen. Now, verse 20, evidently they have at some point walked away from the other disciples because they're walking around the Sea of Galilee, and he turns and sees John following behind them and says, well, what about this man? What about this man? This man would be who? It wasn't a trick question. Now, this man would be John the Apostle. So John the Apostle, John the disciple is here now, following along. Maybe there is some competition there. Sometimes individuals will take that view. But probably, easiest way to read this without putting disciples against disciples is, when you see Peter, who's always with him? John. Remember, I just said this earlier. What's the inner circle? Peter, James, and John. Peter, James, and John in a sailboat. You know, come on. I mean, we know the song. It's Peter, James, and John who are always together. It's Peter, James, and John who go up with him on the Mount of Transfiguration. It's always Peter, James, and John. Guys, I'm going to tell you something. What happens to James? What happens to James? He's killed. Acts chapter 12. Herod strikes him with a sword, kills him. Peter was caught at the same time. But Peter is released from prison. So it's not a big old long jump here for John to go, or for Peter to go, hey, if I'm going to die for my faith, is he going to die too? What's going to happen to him? And Jesus says, if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. You know what he says? That's really not any of your business. Don't worry about it. You better just follow me. Peter's almost like this. Peter, you struggle enough following me. You just better focus on yourself, buddy. But he says, you follow me. Reinforces that. You follow me. You follow me. Now, the saying went out. Verse 23. The saying went out that this disciple would not die. Why would the saying go out that this disciple would not die? I want you to think about that. Why does John tell us that saying went out? And a lot of disciples started believing that John wouldn't die. Why would they say that? He lived a long life. In contrast to the other disciples who what? All died. All died. And by historical account, most of them died over a decade before John died. Now, you already know, folks, how many people in the first century started thinking that Jesus was going to come back any day and quit working. So if disciples kind of already believe in some circles that, hey, Jesus is coming back any day now, and John's still alive into his 90s, all of a sudden people start thinking, either the Lord's coming back any day now or John's going to keep on living. It's not a far jump. And John corrects some of that. He says, that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, if I will that he remain till I come. What is that to you? In other words, Jesus didn't say he would remain till he comes, but if I will. It's not really a statement about John's longevity, but about the Father's desire, Jesus' desire. If he wanted him to keep living, he would. But either way, what is that to you? It's not your business. You just need to focus on following. And then the last two statements here, last two verses, really kind of tying everything together here. The disciple testified to these things. He wrote these things. we know His testimony is true. Generally speaking, that statement, you can already see the switching. Did y'all catch that in just that verse? It switches. This is the disciple. He wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. So it could be that maybe the last two verses were written by one of John's pupils, written by one of his students, who says, yeah, this was John who wrote this. But that's not necessary in some ways. John himself, he could have been the one who said that. We know that some of the writers in Scripture did refer to themselves in that way. What does Moses say about himself? He's the meekest man in all the earth. I love that. That's hilarious. But you know, Moses is the one who wrote that. And so this may be John just referring to himself. This is a true testimony. I wrote these things. You can count on it. Verse 25 reinforces what was already said in the previous chapter. There were other things Jesus did. Obviously, guys, do you appreciate? Jesus lived on the earth around 30 to 33 years. And we have 4 Gospels that tell us about His life on earth. I think I could write like 4 book series about my life already, and I'm 34. She didn't nod quick enough. But I mean, you know, think about your own life. How much could you write about your life over a 34-year span? Okay? And then amplify that by a whole bunch because Jesus was a preacher. Ooh. Folks, I've got reams of paper of things I've said and preached and taught. And I'm only 34. So, you know, yeah, what he says is kind of a duh. There could have been volumes of pages written about the life of Jesus, the good things He did, the kind things He did. But understand something, folks. We have all things that pertain to life and godliness, Peter tells us. We have what we need to bring us to true faith. And John poetically says that if you wrote down everything one by one, not even the world itself would contain the books. That's a pretty cool expression. But it is a reflection of what all Jesus did. And, you know, I hope that doesn't rattle your faith. It shouldn't. There's no way we could have every interaction Jesus had. What we get, though, is what we need. We get what we need, okay? And in some cases, they're almost summary statements. You think Jesus only ever interacted with just a handful of sinful women? Are you kidding me? Every person was a sinful person compared to Him and His holiness. So, yes, think about that. All right. Okay, questions on that last little bit? I didn't go into this because it would be chasing a rat through the weeds, but Catholicism takes that little statement of Jesus and Peter as His commission to the papacy. And so that's kind of where they get some of those ideas. See, He's going to be the head pope. He's going to be the head pastor, shepherd, which is what the pope is. He is the head shepherd of the Catholic Church. And so that's where they get some of those ideas. And did y'all read that in there? Did y'all read anything about papacy in there? No? Okay. All right. So here's what we're going to do. Questions on this text. All right. Let's do some applications then. I think the screen's working. What are some ways we can apply this chapter? Not all at once. I've told you all that. Are you going to make me do it? Okay.
He provides for us when our efforts fail.
Okay. So He provides, that's not an S, for us. I'm going to summarize that always. How about that, Nathan? I did it better than you did. Joe? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, it's kind of one of those subtle things you don't think about until you're forced to go, how can I really apply this? Well, Jesus is in the reinstating business. That's what He does, folks. That's not an excuse to sin like Joe pointed out. That's not what that is. But it is a reminder that I can come to Jesus. I'm supposed to. John?
Love God more than the world.
Okay.
Just like Peter, He went back to the world, but He said, "Do you love me more than?"
Yeah.
He returned. It's like, okay, you got to separate yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're driving home this point that when Jesus is really who He claims to be, folks, everything else falls to the wayside. If Jesus is the Son of God, as He claims to be, as John claims Him to be, folks, nothing else matters. And you want to talk about, I mean, that right there trickles into a whole lot of other categories, folks, that we really need to give some thought to. And the way we make our decisions, the way we raise our children, the way we influence our grandchildren. If Jesus came back from the dead, if Jesus is the Son of God, you know, there's a lot of things that don't matter anymore. That's not that they're wrong to do, but we've got to keep them in perspective. I was talking to a couple of guys yesterday about pee-wee sports. You know, some people lose their minds. This is all that life is. And I'm like, no, it's not. No, it's really not. Even if I wasn't a Christian, this is not all life would be. But because I'm a Christian, it definitely is not all life is to be, okay? Go ahead. Oh, yeah. So we reflect on the question, do you love me? You know, in fact, there's a sense in which Jesus asks us that question. Do you love me? Ooh, that's a tough one, folks. And before we jump on Peter with both feet, we really need to think about the fact that, guys, we have denied Jesus in a whole lot safer environments than Peter did. You know what? I mean, we weren't sitting at the fire. We weren't sitting around the soldiers. We weren't sitting in just right outside the door where they're getting him condemned. We're sitting in our own living room. Nobody's even around. We're on the phone with a friend. I mean, come on. We've denied him too. Abby, go ahead. Yeah. So, of course, he knows, and let's say it like this. You know, I was telling the girls the other day, I was telling you folks recently, the girls and I are right behind us in our devotional at home. And I'm like, you know, do you really stop and think about the fact that when you serve a king who beats death, it doesn't really get any better. Like that's the ultimate trump card. It's like, yeah, but my king beats death. Oh, okay. What's the worst thing that could happen to you? You know, well, you know, it's not like you died. Yeah, it's the worst thing that could happen to you, and our king beats death. The ultimate trump card. All right, let me give you some applications here. Number one, stick to Jesus. Without Him, you get nothing. With Him, you get more than you can carry. I'm referencing the fact that they caught no fish at night, and the fact that when Jesus shows up and they do what Jesus says, they have more than they can haul into the boat. Okay? And so that's exactly the underlying message there is, you better stick to Jesus. Okay? Number two, Jesus really came back from the dead. Because of our points earlier, that changes everything. That changes absolutely everything, folks. Number three, Jesus is after real restoration, which seeks restoration for others. So I want you to see that there's almost this ripple effect. Not only does Jesus want you to be restored, Joe's point earlier, He wants you to be reinstated to your role, but your job is to go help others be restored. You see Peter, Jesus is saying, hey Peter, you need to come back. And then Peter says, okay Lord, I'm coming back. And Jesus says, then go take care of others too. Go tend the lambs, go feed the sheep. You see that, folks? Our project is a ripple effect project. We are changed to go help others change too. Okay? Every Christian is supposed to be, in that sense, an evangelist, a teacher, a sharer of the good news. Did you have something, John? Yeah. And the reality is, that's why we have a brotherhood, our family here in Christ that helps us do the job. Number four, you need to do your own work. Now, I want you to understand, that does not take away from the point John was making or I just made. But the reality is, at the end of the day, you've got to do your own work. I tell you, sometimes that gets in our way. Well, so-and-so this or so-and-so that. That's irrelevant. You know, don't we have that conversation with our child? Our child says, well, so-and-so did this, and so then I did it back. And what do we say? That doesn't matter. You can't control what they do. You can only control how you respond to what they do. That point still stands, folks. It stands in the way that we serve our King. You need to do your own work. But as you do your own work, and I do my own work, what happens? The overall is improved and made better. Okay, every part does its share, Ephesians chapter 4, 11 through 16, and the body is built up as a result. And then number five, we don't have everything possible, but everything we need, and all of it is accurate, so believe. Okay, I appreciate your careful attention. I don't normally do a 4-month class, but because of the way we were trying to get this back on schedule, that's how that worked. So this was a 4-month study instead of a 3. Next quarter, starting essentially next Sunday, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. I'm looking forward to that study. If you'll see it, this is narrative, what we've been studying, so we've been covering longer sections. 1st, 2nd Timothy and Titus, we're going to cover like 10, 12, 14 verses a class. So it's going to be a lot slower and a little bit more in the text and textual, okay? But I appreciate your careful attention. I hope John benefited you. Really enjoyed this study. I think this is like the 3rd time I've taught through John, but man, I love John's gospel. Last questions? You could ask it about John 21 or the whole gospel, I guess. Okay. All right, thank you for your attention and thank you for your comments today.